Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Better Together podcast, where we go beyond the highlight reel to talk about the real moments that shape who we become as business owners, as leaders, and as people. I'm Shawn Sundsvold, and with me, as always, is my partner in life and in business, Kelly Sundsvold. Today's guest, Kirsten Ludwig, is the founder of InGoodCo, a brand consultancy that partners with challenger brands that want to show up differently. Brands that don't just disrupt categories, but expand what's possible inside of them. She spent decades helping companies reimagine culture, creativity, and connection in a way that's deeply intentional and relentlessly human. Along with owning an amazing marketing agency and marketing company and brand consultancy, she's also a podcaster, speaker, and a mom who has found a way to balance it all. But what makes Kirsten's story so compelling isn't just the strategy. It's the courage. Whether she's guiding global brands or delivering a keynote on pushing past fear and embracing the cringe, her work is really rooted in transformation. It's about saying yes to reinvention, even when it's uncomfortable. Actually, especially when it's uncomfortable. In a world that often values polish over process, Kirsten is a voice for brave evolution, both in business and in life. And today we're lucky to learn from her journey. Kirsten, welcome to the show. I am so excited you are here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shawn and Kelly, for having me. I'm really, really excited for this conversation.
Well, let's just start at the beginning and learn a little bit about you. How did you get started with your branding consultancy InGoodCo?
We started about 10 years ago. Most of my background has really been on the brand side. So for many, many years, I was in-house for various fashion and retail brands. And I was most always in kind of innovative positions. I'd be brought in to make a brand cooler, make it more relevant. And so I was always kind of had one foot in, one foot out. You had to be drinking the Kool-Aid with one foot, but you really had to have another perspective as well. And so what that meant was that my team was often made up as an agency, not kind of an in-house team. Then I went to the agency side at the end of my working for other people career, and worked and kind of built up an agency that ultimately we sold to WPP. So kind of went through hyper growth and experiencing that in under 3 years. We went from about 30 people to 230 people, from one office to 4. It was just really, really intense, and really learned a lot of lessons out of that experience, good and bad. And from that really started InGoodCo. So about 10 years ago.
Awesome. And you've spent years helping brands push past like the expected and to stand for something bigger, right? For those, for obviously our audience just getting to know you, how would you describe the work that you guys do?
It's really strategy. It's really about really understanding what we call active positioning. So it's really understanding where we want to take the brand. How far can we see the vision? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? But it's a very active strategy. We don't believe in a strategy that's kind of, you get enclosed in a boardroom and then a year, 3 years later, you come out with this deck that kind of sits around and nobody actually utilizes. What we really do is have a long-term vision, but then we say, well, what do we do today? How do we change social tomorrow? The campaign that we're going to do in a week, what's that going to look like, so that we're really working towards that longer vision and that longer journey.
So you talk a lot about challenger brands. I love that term. I really want to know more about that. What makes a brand a challenger, and why are you so drawn to them?
Great question. Challenger brands are, the way that we define challenger brands, it's a brand that is not looking at the competitive set. And I've worked for, so many brands that you look around and, oh, what's that brand doing? Oh, how are we making this? And internally they start to kind of question themselves, right? Of like, should we do this? Should we not do this? And what a challenger brand is doing is not looking at the competitive set. It's looking at how we're going to reinvent the industry, right? Whatever a part of, whatever kind of industry they're in, they're looking at maybe it's a fashion brand, and they're looking at what tech is doing, or they're looking at what beauty is doing, or they're getting inspiration beyond that and going beyond the status quo to really ultimately say, we're going to define and raise the bar for what this category can be.
Yeah. Actually, I love that you said that. I mean, I know we're in a very similar industry. I know you do very different things than what we do. But I love that idea of, I was just talking with a client the other day about how, if an particular industry is doing everything this way, you need to think about going that way instead. I think Gary Vee talked about it as a zig and zag, really just evaluating. I love how you're looking at different brands. So you've given some keynotes of fear, embracing the cringe, and pushing past perfection, which I so relate with. Where does that come from in your own story? I'd love to hear it.
It's deep. It's certainly my current soapbox, which I'm very, very much a believer in. And I think, like most things in my life, it started personally, right? It started in it started in probably a few other things, but certainly most specifically by divorce and kind of going
Okay.
through that process and which was very, very hard going through that process and really coming out the other end ultimately, and really seeing the change that had happened, seeing my courage in that process and seeing the person that I had become and very, very proud and really seeing the work that it took, but then kind of the results that it enabled. And so that was a really a key unlock for me. And then I think in work and in my journey, I've had more awareness around that and awareness around courage. I think I've always been a courageous person that's kind of pushed through, but I think in getting older, I think, in hitting 50, you really give no shits. I hope we can swear on this. And it's really true. It really is an unlock of kind of going through and really saying like, well, wait a minute, why do I care what other people think? Why do I give a shit? And so it's really kind of, I've leaned in and been more and more bold with my voice. And it's something that I want to share. I wish I knew when I was younger, when I was kind of coming up the ranks, earlier on in my career, to really say, why are we not just jumping in with our opinion? Why are people sitting in the back? Why aren't we everybody kind of raising their hand, and especially women, to really have a bold voice? So it's something that I really lean into because I've seen kind of the fruits of my labor personally as well as professionally. It's just something that's kind of innate in who I am. And I think with kind of more and more years, both in my career, in my work, and in my age, it's a voice that I've leaned into more and more, and it's gotten bold.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about that struggle of kind of like getting out there, right? And I think that's a struggle for business owners, but I also think there's that tension that they balance and we balance as business leaders of like, I need to be seen, I need to be out there, but there's also that moment of like, I can feel exposed, right? And like all of my whatevers are out there, right? So, as you've gone through your journey, how have you learned to sort of balance that tension?
Yeah. I think quite honestly, it's something that I literally look for. For me, it's a guidepost now, right? It's where do you feel, nobody wants to write the LinkedIn post. Nobody wants to post the thing on. So like, it feels uncomfortable because it is. You're leaning into a vulnerability and you're exposing yourself in a way where you're not sure how people are going to take it. And that's vulnerability, right? And for me, it's the more and more that I do it, it's still hard. You still have cringe every day doing the things, but the more and more I can lean into those things and really say, oh, wow, that cringe, that uncomfortable feeling, that's not something you should push away from. That's something that you should really lean into, because what's on the other side of that is where the magic is. What's on the other side of that, really for you personally, for you sharing your story, people relate to that, they connect to that, kind of all of the things really happen and the magic is really there, but you can't get to the magic if you're not going to climb Cringe Mountain.
Yes, I
Ooh,
love that. I want to
that's a
coin that,
great
right?
statement.
So
That's
yeah, somebody else coined Cringe Mountain for sure, but I think it's a
yeah,
great
Yeah.
term.
it really
Such a
is.
visual,
Yes,
like
it
you
is.
just you just like all I can think of just this person like who's looking up at this big hill and going like this, it's like I can just totally like visualize that. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
And it
that's
really is that. Yeah. I think there's little things every day that we do. There's big things that we're aware of. But I think for me in my life, I know the magic is on the other side. So it's like, what can I do today that's going to feel cringe?
yeah,
Yeah, it,
exactly.
it kind of ties into that statement of like, everything you want is on the other side of what you're not willing to do, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
So just yeah, it ties in with that. I love it.
Yeah, it's hard to put yourself out there,
It
It's
is.
hard to speak up in those meetings. It's hard to do all that. There's so much hard, but there's so much reward on the other side of, as you said, cringe mountain. And that's part of why we do this podcast. We're hoping that it's an inspiration to people who are listening, that it's not all just the highlight reel. It's not sexy to always own your business. Sometimes it is doing a podcast when you have a cold. Like it is
Yeah.
hard, and that's easy. There's a lot of sleepless nights, and I think the perfection that we put on our highlight reel sometimes doesn't adequately show the real journey of an entrepreneur and really the richness that people get out of those challenges that we have.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Totally. Yeah. And like so many small business owners feel the pressure to do what's expected, I think. So, what advice would you give to brands to find a voice that's truly theirs and not just what the industry is doing?
Right. And I think we're starting to see brands really lean into kind of that vulnerability, lean into nobody wants perfection anymore. Like, I think that's super clear. We
Right.
have AI on one side and kind of we're getting that. So I think, the trust economy is coming and that's going to be really, really important. And I think brands, that's a big part of what we do, of really leaning in. Every brand is different, but really leaning into, where is that connection point with your customer? Where is that point where they really want to be seen with you? What is that unlock that you can do for them? What are you ultimately providing them? You might be selling them shoes, but there's something that you are unlocking for them, whether it's courage, whether it's self-confidence, whatever it may be. Really figure out what you're unlocking for your customer. And there could be a few different, because many brands have a few different customers to really go after, but really understand what that is and then lean into that, in a way that maybe feels like you're pushing it a little far. And, the CEO or the CMO is a little like, oh, I don't know, this is a little bit risky, because the brands that we've seen doing that, Bobby is one that's a great example. The brand, like they're really leaning into kind of pushing things and saying like, we're going to really support moms, and we're going to really go after that. And we're going to say, we're all for the mom. And so the things that they're doing are about supporting their customer, not saying, hey, here's formula, go and buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, one of the things that I've, that you put on your website and I've heard you talk about before is that every brand has a culture, right? And they're not separate things. They integrate very well. And I think you've even said like they're two sides of the same coin. Can you help kind of unpack that a little bit and what you mean by that and how that
Sure.
applies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see brand is really the external facing, right? It's what we know what a brand is at this point. We know, going into market, going into online, wherever we're shopping, like we understand what a brand is. But culture is just the internal version of that, right? And culture and brand need to work together. You can't say, oh, we're going to do this huge rebrand. We're going to suddenly, have a pivot and become a completely different brand without having buy-in of your team. And when you do have that buy-in of whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a campaign, whether it's a complete reinvention, when you do have that, that's where the momentum really happens, and that's where the excitement happens. And you can see that in brands that are really doing that. They're really connected in culture and brand, and there's a synergy there in the way that it's working versus feeling disconnected to say, oh, the culture is one way and, the brand is another way. That doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, kind of moving towards the more personal life balance, all of that stuff. You're a parent, you're a business owner, speaker, creator. What does balance look like for you these days? Or do you even believe in balance?
It's a great question. I've had a lot of conversations about this recently because I think it's different, right? There was an article in The Atlantic that somebody was talking about, and this was a while ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, about like, can you have it all? You can't have it all. And kind of figure, it was kind of dispelling that myth. And I think the reality is, as a mom and as, everybody's very busy lives now and trying to do all of the things, you're never going to be perfect in all of the things, right? If you are having the meeting, then you're going to miss dance class, like kind of all different parts and pieces. And it's evolving, and it looks different every single day. And it's just trying to show up in the best way for all of the things. And then I think it's about being really authentic and open that's working. So for example, we put everything on our calendar. We don't say, oh, we're going to hold space, or take I have this appointment that I'm going to put on my calendar. I say, no, it's my daughter's, gymnastics competition or doctor appointment or whatever it may be, Botox appointment, like whatever it may be, to make sure that we're being and showing and representing in a really open and kind of very transparent way. And, then we allow, my business partner and I are really able to then cover for each other if we need. Hey, I'm going to have to be on this. I'm going to be on the phone, but I'm going to be driving because this is happening. Okay, great. Then I'll lead the call, whatever that may be. And we can really show up for each other and have that support, because I think that's what you really need within any of it. I think it's about community. And I think you have that connection in community when you're open and transparent and vulnerable. And I think that for me is really a key unlock to certainly not feeling like I'm balanced, because I think I never do. And then I think on the other end for me, like I do a lot of apologizing as a parent, right? Oh, I'm sorry I said this, or I blew up, I reacted this way. Like I feel like I'm doing that half of my life. But I think it's a
Yes.
great example, for my kids. I'm proud that that's an aspect that they're growing up with.
Yeah, man, that relates so much because I know Kelly and I both have had those kind of conversations with our kids of like, in the moment of like, oh man, I really handled that wrong. I'm sorry. It's like you're modeling how to repair something. And I think that's so awesome, right? And how to keep a relationship as a priority. I was curious as you were talking about like life and balancing everything. There's the whole idea of like, work-life balance and work-life integration. Have you heard those two terms used before
Somewhat,
at all?
somewhat. Tell me
Okay.
more.
It was just more about like, whether with a work-life balance, it's like trying to balance the scales, right? Of like, how do I
Hmm.
balance everything versus work-life integration? It's like,
Hmm.
here's my life and how do I integrate all these different things into it? I'm curious if you have a sort of a leaning towards one way or the other.
For sure. I mean, for sure, it's the integration part. I think that that's why
Mhm.
we started the agency in the first place. For example, we've never had an office, so we've been remote since inception, which was over 10 years ago. And it's really just the idea that like we want everybody to work and be inspired in their best place. And for most people,
Yeah.
that's not a cubicle
Yeah.
in an office. So
Yep.
really leaning into that, and we really work because of the quality of life that we want to have. And so very much the most recent, I just came back from Europe 2 days ago, and I was there with my business partner, and we were on assignment, exploring for the Olympics coming up in Italy. Like we were doing a lot of different things that were work related. We had a lot of client calls. There was a lot of things happening that particular week, but we were also enjoying ourselves and having great dinners and exploring things together. And that's a big part of why we really created it. It's really about, for me, it's really about, working to live and making sure I wouldn't want to do it any other way. I wouldn't really, life is too short. And to really create something that we not just enjoy, but actually, create something better for people in this world, has a positive impact in some way. And there's kind of a great excitement and energy to it in the process. And that's for me, really where I find the flow, right? When I'm really leaning into things that are really joyful for me, that are really energetic for me, that's when I find things, just the universe aligning and kind of all of the things happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you mentioned kind of having a lot going on, right? And how to balance everything. Do you have any practices or things that you do that kind of keep you grounded when everything feels really overwhelming and busy? Like, how do you kind of keep yourself focused and moving forward?
Yes, for sure. For me, I would say it's a lot of exercise, and meditation is a big lean in for me. So, for example, this morning I woke up at 5, had my tea, did my meditation, kind of had a minute for myself, and then woke up my daughter, who likes to be woken up at 6, and then I did Peloton, for 40 minutes. And so for me, it's leaning in and making sure that I have that I'm not kind of starting too quickly and kind of immediately running into things, that I really have a moment when I'm not on my phone, I'm not checking email, I'm not doing anything. And for me, that unlock has been meditation, and then exercise, doing something for myself. And then I can really jump into it, and had a wonderful conversation with my daughter on the way to school, and just a very, very relaxed morning. So once I can start the day with that, and then ending is similar for me. It's really about kind of during the day and balancing, and then I have to go pick up my kids, and now I have to pick them up earlier than I thought I would, and kind of all of those parts and pieces. But then coming back and making sure that everybody takes a deep breath, phones are away, and then we have kind of a moment to have dinner, chill out afterwards, go to bed in a relaxing way, have some kind of snuggle time, story time, whatever that looks like. For me, it's kind of the beginning and the end of the day, making sure there's those moments when you're really present.
Yeah. I think there's intentionality to that, right?
Hmm.
We're talking about like putting your phones away and things like that. And we actually did something like that in our house. Like when we get to family dinners, we've created a phrase called corporate pineapple. And like it can get thrown around our kitchen at any time, right? Like if somebody's trying to sneak a look at their phone or whatever it might be, we're like, hey, corporate pineapple, right? It's like the reminder of like,
I love
this is
that.
not the time for that, right? So I think that,
And why pineapple?
I don't know.
So it came from it. Yes. Yes. So it came from a season when our oldest daughter, was a teenager. And we said we need to have like a code name or something, because we don't want to be like, put down your phone, and like you can do it to us too. And so she said something, I don't know what it was. It definitely was not corporate pineapple, but I asked her, I said, my follow up was like, did you say corporate pineapple? And she was like, no, but that can be our word. So we've adapted
Great.
that since she
I
was in
love
ninth
it.
grade.
I love
So we
it.
always say that. So
Well done.
there you go. So obviously, like, businesses grow, they develop, they change. We've had conversations with people that have started many businesses. What advice do you have for people who feel like they've maybe outgrown the business they started with? Like they kind of just reached they don't feel like they can do anything. Maybe they've lost some spark creativity. What do you advise people for? with?
It's a great question. I mean, we've had, a huge pivot in our business. I think it's really about finding what brings you joy and really leaning into that, finding what brings you, because oftentimes I think if you've kind of felt like you're kind of stuck, it's because you're no longer having fun. You're no longer enjoying it. And I think the work
Yeah.
is really reflected whether you're enjoying it or not. I've certainly seen that in my career. So I think it's really leaning and finding out what it is that you do want to be doing. What are the parts of work that you are enjoying, and how can you lean in and be doing more of that? Everybody's going to have parts of their day where they're like, oh, I have to do this. But what are the parts that you can really lean into and start to turn those on a bit more and more every day and really start to lean in to that? And I think that's where you find this unlock and you find momentum to follow within that. I think we live in an age where you can do anything, you can connect with anybody. And so I think it's really about doing that. I think it's getting away from, just saying, well, I wish I could find a company that allows me to do this, or I wish I could find a job that does this. You can do that. If you want to start being a creator, if you want to start writing, or whatever, to start designing, whatever it is, you can do that today and start really doing that. And then maybe at some point you'll get paid for it. But I think it's start doing that. So leaning into that thing. But then the other part goes back to Cringe Mountain of, okay, we'll start putting it out there because it's not going to be
Yes.
perfect. It's not going to be that. And that's hard. And then I think that's really where you find the unlock and the momentum.
Yeah, I love that. I always find if I'm getting a little creatively stifled, a move of locations, it's usually around the time that Shawn and I need to disappear for the weekend. Nothing elaborate, but just getting out of the city and just going to like a small cabin in the woods and just having peace and quiet really can be spark that creativity, and like you said, like maybe if someone listening wants to start painting, get away, just start doing it like you said. I just think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, yeah. And travel, I couldn't agree with you more. And it can be a small weekend away, it can be a staycation, it can be, a trip to Europe,
Yeah.
whatever. But it gives you perspective to get out of the day to day and then to be in another culture and experience that you're automatically kind of having to shift your, well, it always happens this way mentality. And you're having kind of new experiences just in the exposure of that. And I think it's really about leaning into that. It's been transformational for me for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, I know you also run a couple of podcasts. Tell us about your podcasts, like who they're for and what really got you interested in doing your own podcast.
Sure. A big part of what I've always done is I really love connecting with people. Like I just love having these conversations. Shawn, when you and I first talked, I mentioned earlier, it was so great. I connect with anybody that reaches out to me and I always have great conversations, but it's an unlock like what we had of like, well, you have somebody on the books, you don't really know about them, but then you connect and immediately it's kind of this heartfelt conversation. It's like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like that's what I want to spend my day doing is really having those conversations where you're sharing what you know, you're having a conversation, you're learning things, you're being present, you're being transparent. And so the first podcast is really around good thinking. So good thinking is a Substack that my business partner writes. That's been an amazing unlock. That's a whole nother story, but that's been an amazing unlock. And it's really becoming kind of a media arm for us. So it's quite a popular Substack. Everybody should subscribe if they don't already around brands, trends, and marketing. So it's a weekly Substack. And then we have a podcast off of that. So it really follows a lot of the same kind of thoughts and things that are going on, but we have different guests. We have different kind of overall signs that we're seeing of kind of potential, directions of things that are happening, trust economy, things like that. And then I also have a podcast called Lit From Within, which is with my best friend who we have a beauty brand together called Beauty Grass. And she is a super woo-woo, as am I, just like amazing human and has all of these unbelievable scientific and holistic kind of beauty knowledge. She reads everything, she knows everything. So it's really getting on and sharing that with other people. We did an episode on perimenopause, for example, and that seemed to be a really big unlock for people because they want to know, what the hell should I be doing? And so we just kind of get on, have great conversations. And so for both of those, I'm fortunate enough to have businesses with my best friends. And so to be able to get on there and have a conversation and share what we know and talk to other people, like sign me up. Sign me up. I could do that all day long.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that you're in business with your best friends. Obviously we're married a couple. We've been together for 24 years, and I've had several people, I couldn't work with my husband or I couldn't work with my spouse or whatever, my partner, fill in the blank. And, it doesn't happen overnight. If you were to ask me, I don't know, 10 years ago, I'd say, no way. it takes a little bit to cultivate that and go from that
Hmm.
friend, that partner, that spouse, whatever, develop it into like a professional working relationship for sure. Sean's definitely been my, you know, better half. We've gone through a lot together, and our show is called Better Together, because we really believe that business isn't built in isolation. So, who or what has helped you feel better together in your journey besides your best friends that you do your work
I
with?
mean, I think that that's a big part of it. It's a big part of having that. I think, an unlock for me of having a business is having a business partner that you can collaborate with, that can kind of see things differently. When you're stuck, they can help unlock. It's just it's a continued partnership and balance, and it's always about having that conversation and back and forth. And we've kind of reflected on the last 10 years, and I don't know that we would be around had it just been one of us, right?
Mm,
Because there is kind of that balance to
Yes.
it and that great collaboration, both in the fun times and also in the hard times. Probably more importantly in the hard times. And so I think that's a great unlock to me. And I think for me, I think everything is kind of a community sport, right? So I think for parenting, that's a huge part for me. My best friends that are, a big part of aunts and uncles in my kids' lives. And I think, similarly in work, it's about the collaboration. It's about having an idea, but another person having an iteration off of that idea, and then kind of going back and forth and making that idea better. I really love that process. I love people, and I love collaborating, and I love the excitement and the energy that goes on when you're kind of bouncing something back and forth, and then ultimately what you're creating is better than either of you would have on
Yeah.
your own.
yeah.
Couldn't
Yeah. And I
agree
think
more.
when you're kind of doing that, it's almost like you're trying to reinvent the situation, right? And we both of us, right? We work in a business of trying to help businesses and brands recreate themselves, right? Or reinvent themselves. So, for people who are listening and maybe they're kind of in that place, right? Of trying to reinvent themselves or do something different, whether it's from a personal side or professional side, what would you want to pass on to them as they go through that process?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit different for people versus brands, but I think it's really understanding. I think either way, it's understanding why you're doing it. Right? So I think, again, it's probably going to tie back to the cringe in some way, but I think it's tying back to why are you doing it? Are you, especially from a personal standpoint, are you running away from something, or are you running to something?
Mm,
Mm,
And I think it's really important to have that distinction. And then with a brand, to really understand, it's one of the first questions we ask. Okay, you want to rebrand. Why do you want to rebrand? Like, what's really driving that, and making sure that the work that we're going to be doing is answering that question in the right way. Because is that the right question? Is it
yeah.
really about, reinventing because you want to do this, because you want to update, like really trying to figure out what that is. And I think, personally, just making sure that what you're looking to do is running towards something, and excited about something versus, hiding from something or
yeah.
running from
Yeah.
something.
I love that. Kind of goes with that cringe too, leaning into the
Yeah.
challenges.
It
Yeah.
does, because you've gotta be really truthful, right, with yourself, and really say, "No, I'm running from this," and figure that out, and then look at it, right? Look at it and deal with it, because the only way out is through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. So if someone would like to learn more about you, listen to your amazing podcasts, Sean was telling me that you have several. So, and you've brought up some here. How can they get in touch with you, not only just with your companies, but also your podcasts as well?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me. It's just Kirsten Ludwig. Good Thinking on Substack. So it's just Good Thinking. Chris Danton's my business partner and the writer of that. So that's a good way to find and sign up on Substack. And then our website is We Are In Good Co.
Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Kirsten, this was such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time. And I definitely want to just, we'll definitely stay in touch because I think you're just an amazing personality. So again, thank you for
Likewise.
being here and enjoy the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. I love chatting with the both of you, and really connecting. And again, the inception of this conversation was just so inspiring for me. So I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.